you, thank you. Hey. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much.
White people in this nation and the world have got to unite.
We're going to stand proudly and honestly and courageously, and we're not going to stop until we win. Thank you.
So what was it about him that attracted you to him?
Because his stand on the issues coincide with ours. Paleoconservative, of course, is a traditional conservative. I don't necessarily consider myself a conservative. Not sure what's left to conserve. But paleoconservatives, yes, of course, accept racial realities. There are racial differences. They're inherent, they're genetic, there's nothing wrong with that. And we understand that. We are racial realists.
Grenada was the target. The aim was to overthrow the revolution led by the New Jewel movement and to return the ousted tyrant Eric Dyson to power. Mercenary leader Michael Perdue of Houston, Texas, began plotting his counter-revolution as soon as he read published accounts of the revolution in the spring of 1979. Gary agreed and told Perdue to proceed. Perdue then contacted his old friend in New Orleans, David Duke, one-time Nazi and former Grand Wizard of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, now leader of the National Association for the Advancement of White People. Duke helped by putting Perdue in touch with several of his contacts, beginning a tangled web of international fascist intrigue and high finance. Michael Perdue represented this coup attempt. He represented the incipient coup against Dominica as basically as a U.S. government operation. This is how he represented it to the Klansmen and Nazis he recruited for his group. At any rate, of Michael Perdue's claims that the United States government was behind this Klan and Nazi coup, Ken Lawrence writes as follows. All the recruits were gathered under false pretenses. Perdue told them he was a Vietnam veteran with combat mercenary experience in both Nicaragua and Uruguay. He claimed he had backing from the CIA and the State Department, and that former Texas Governor John Connally and U.S. Representative Ronald Paul of Houston knew what he was doing and approved of it. He told them he would be fighting communism in Dominica.
He's not considered a presidential frontrunner, but Ron Paul's raised tens of millions of dollars from a devoted base, many of them young people who love his libertarian straight talk.
The role, of course, is to return this country to sanity.
But how's this for straight talk? June 1992, right after the LA riots. In a copy obtained by CNN of the Ron Paul Political Report, one of several newsletters published in his name during the 1980s and 90s, quote, order was only restored in LA when it came time for the blacks to pick up their welfare checks. Another excerpt. The criminals who terrorize our cities, in riots and on every non-riot day, are not exclusively young black males, but they largely are. As children, they are trained to hate whites, to believe that white oppression is responsible for all black ills, to fight the power, to steal and loot as much money from the white enemy as possible.
We don't think a child of 13 should be held as responsible as a man of 23. That's true for most people. But black males age 13 who have been raised on the streets and who have joined criminal gangs are as big, strong, tough, scary, and culpable as any adult and should be treated as such. Michael, your response to that. That's Ron Paul.
This man, you know, this is the super predator thinking of the 1970s when that theory came out in the early 80s that African-American people were preternaturally inclined, almost naturally gifted with an evil genius of crime. This is just horrible. This is almost ripped from the headlines of Tarzan meets Jane and the jungle aspect of African-American culture. Look at all the vicious stereotypes coming together to form a cohesive social theory that Ron Paul articulates. It's not only scary, it's misinformed, and if he is given power by the state to exercise his viewpoints, we are in for an Orwellian future.
In some excerpts, the reader may be led to believe the words are Ron Paul's. In the Ron Paul Political Report in October 1992, the writer describes carjacking as the hip-hop thing to do among the urban youth who play unsuspecting whites like pianos. Writes about advice from others on how to avoid carjacking. Then, I frankly don't know what to make of such advice, but even in my little town of Lake Jackson, Texas, I've urged everyone in my family to know how to use a gun in self-defense, for the animals are coming. Paul's spokesman says Paul has lived in Lake Jackson for years, but says Paul never wrote that.
Back in the 90s, Paul thought the newsletters were a key part of his political machine.
I deliver babies for a living, but I also do an investment letter. It's called the Ron Paul Survival Report, expressing concern about surviving in this age of big government.
I also put out a political type of business investment newsletter. It sort of covered all these areas, and it covered a lot about what was going on in Washington.
When Ron Paul ran for Congress again in 1996 after being home in Texas for a few years, the Dallas Morning News pulled a couple of passages from a 1992 issue of the Ron Paul Political Report. Quote, "If you have ever been robbed by a black teenaged male, you know how unbelievably fleet of foot they can be." Also, given the inefficiencies of what D.C. laughingly calls the criminal justice system, I think we can safely assume that 95% of the black males in that city are semi-criminal or entirely criminal. These were quotes from Ron Paul's newsletters. And when the Dallas Morning News asked him about them running for Congress that year, he did not disavow these statements. Quote, "In the interview, he did not deny he made the statement about the swiftness of black men. If you try to catch someone that has stolen a purse from you, there is no chance to catch them," Dr. Paul said. He also said the comment about black men in the nation's capital was made while writing about a 1992 study produced by the National Center on Incarceration and Alternatives, a criminal justice think tank based in Virginia. Quote, "These aren't my figures," Dr. Paul said Tuesday. "That is the assumption you can gather from the report." When the Houston Chronicle started asking about those comments, also in 1996, Dr. Paul's campaign spokesman defended the remarks about the criminality of black men. Thusly, he said that the Reverend Jesse Jackson had also talked about urban crime, so essentially that made it okay. So that's how Ron Paul and his political campaign responded to criticism about nakedly racist passages in his newsletters when he was asked about them during his congressional campaign in the mid-90s. He responded essentially by defending those nakedly racist passages.
Newsletters that rant against Martin Luther King, the Israeli lobby, gays, and AIDS victims.
You can discriminate against somebody who has AIDS. You don't have to associate with them. We would protect the businessman who might not want to hire somebody with AIDS. This whole idea that an AIDS victim has AIDS victims' rights, this is this distorted idea about civil liberties. There's only one kind of rights. There's no such thing as minority rights or women's rights. There's only individual rights.
All these people with AIDS, we can't have them mingling around with us. They're going to pollute the blood supplies. And he said, quote, the gays were actively trying to poison the blood supply with AIDS. Yeah, that's a brilliant strategy. Get a disease that's going to kill you so you can poison the blood supply of straight people.
With AIDS, the businessman, the employer, has the right to protect himself if he wants. If it's his desire, he can sever the contract or not enter the contract and say, look, I don't want to deal with you. And he has the right to do that. You know, it's so bizarre today that some of the laws and the court rulings indicate that if you have hepatitis, you're not allowed to work in a restaurant. But if you have AIDS, you can't fire the person.
He said that AIDS patients should not be allowed to eat in restaurants, that AIDS can be transmitted by saliva, which is 100% false. He said these men, they don't really see a reason to live past their 50s. They're not married, they have no children, and their lives are centered on new sexual partners. So they enjoy the attention and the pity that comes with being sick. Yeah, they just love getting AIDS.
The Ron Paul campaign has landed the endorsement of a reverend whose beliefs are absolutely jaw-dropping. The Reverend Philip G. Kaiser thinks homosexuals should be executed. But the Paul campaign was thrilled to get Reverend Kaiser's endorsement, putting on their website, saying in a press release on Paul's website, "We welcome Reverend Kaiser's endorsement and the enlightening statements he makes on how Ron Paul's approach to government is consistent with Christian beliefs." But later, Paul's camp scrubbed the news of Kaiser's endorsement from its website. No explanation was given. It turns out Reverend Kaiser is in favor of what he calls biblical law, including the execution of homosexuals. He has written about it. As we have seen, he says, while many homosexuals would be executed, the threat of capital punishment can be restorative. Kaiser confirmed all of this when contacted and interviewed by Talking Points Memo. He said he didn't see much hope for it happening anytime soon. But he did say, under a Ron Paul presidency, states would be freed up to not have political correctness imposed on them.
There's one newsletter addressing American militias, ranting against the federal government, saying if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. That's from January 1995, just as Ron Paul was getting set to take office in his second stint in Congress. Paul's spokesman says the candidate doesn't know who wrote any of them. When we asked if Mr. Paul would try to find out, the spokesman said no.
These newsletters have been around for a long time, but because they weren't distributed electronically, they were mailed out, the process of collecting them and digitizing them and getting them online has meant that the excerpts have sort of come out slowly in dribs and drabs over the years. We have previously seen excerpts like this one, where somebody purporting to be Ron Paul, writing in Ron Paul first-person voice under Ron Paul letterhead, but who Ron Paul now says definitely wasn't him, passes on advice about using an unregistered gun and wiping your fingerprints off of it if you use your gun to shoot a menacing black youth.
No, I'm not a racist. Matter of fact, Rosa Parks is one of my heroes. Martin Luther King is a hero.
This is from the Ron Paul newsletter, the February 1990 edition. Quote, "Boy, it sure burns me to have a national holiday for that pro-communist philanderer, Martin Luther King. I voted against this outrage time and time again as a congressman. What an infamy that Ronald Reagan approved it. We can thank him for our annual Hate Whitey Day."
On the 40th anniversary of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, you said this on the floor of the House. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 did not improve race relations or enhance freedom. Now, you were not subject to segregation before the 1964 Civil Rights Act, so is it possible that you don't know or you don't understand that the removal of segregation was in fact an enhancement of freedom for African Americans who were not allowed to drink from the same drinking fountain as you were, who were not allowed to patronize certain restaurants, who were not allowed to do all sorts of things? Their freedom was very sharply restricted by law until that law. So how can you say that it did not enhance freedom?
Hello, my name is William Johnson. I am chairman of the American Third Position. We are an emerging political party formed to address both the immediate challenges of today as well as the timeless conflicts confronting all social orders in any given age. We strive for the highest ideals of mankind and therefore embrace all good principles from whatever source. Accordingly, we cannot be characterized as either left or right, Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal. We are indeed the third position. That the human species is comprised of a patchwork of differing races and cultures is a matter of common sense. And yet there are those who would destroy this richness in humanity in order to replace it with a rootless mass, lacking identity and history. In such a nightmare world, the very words race, nation, and culture would cease to have any meaning at all. In other words, this forced multiculturalism is seeking to destroy the living soil in which all peoples have their roots.
What you need to do is attack their benefits. No free education, no free subsidies, no citizenship, no birthright citizenship.
Never say Anonymous doesn't keep their word. As Anonymous has said they would, they have hacked the website of the American Nationalist Party white supremacists and done their damage. They also allege serious links between the group and U.S. presidential hopeful Ron Paul. Not just the Ron Paul campaign, but Ron Paul himself. Here's the official statement put forward by Anonymous. Fellow Anons, we are pleased to bring you the dismantling of a major U.S.-based white supremacist network known as the American Third Position. These racist losers have chapters all across the U.S. and operate several white power websites, forums, and online stores. They're even running a candidate in the 2012 elections, although they try hard to maintain a professional public image to camouflage their vile racism. We're now airing all of their dirty laundry all over the internet. Contained in this major dump are several thousand private forum messages, personal emails, internal organization notes, names, phone numbers, home addresses, and all other information on all of their members and supporters. It's time for these cowardly suit and tie white supremacists to sleep with one eye open. Scared much? In addition to finding the usual racist rants and interactions with other white power groups, we also found a disturbingly high amount of members who are involved in campaigning for Ron Paul. According to these messages, Ron Paul has regularly met with many A3P members, even engaging in conference calls with their board of directors. We put extra effort in ruining the life of A3P webmaster Jamie Kelso. On top of being the board of directors of A3P, former Scientologist and high-ranking Ron Paul organizer, he's also the account owner of German Nazi forums and the store nslforum.org, rhsversan.com. We went ahead and wiped those websites off the internet as well, dumping private messages and order information.
The genes that you have, the physiology that you have, that is the result of thousands upon thousands of generations of your ancestors, okay, producing you. Now, if you chose to pick some other race and reproduce with that other race, you would end that permanently.
Here, turn this around so that you don't represent a campaign for liberty.
We built the farm.
Welcome to the Ron Paul curriculum. For many years, I've thought about how I could participate in education. At one time, I thought I might like to start an ordinary school. But since getting out of Congress, I have become fascinated with the opportunities to promote education through the internet, and that is the reason that I am very much involved with the Ron Paul curriculum. Economics certainly won't be teaching socialism and Keynesianism, and history will have a different perspective as well.
Hello, I'm Gary North, and I teach the first half of the course on government for the Ron Paul curriculum. Tom Woods teaches the second half. The first philosophy, which we promote, is sometimes called the freedom philosophy. Other people call it libertarianism.
But sort of along the line of the pills creating the immorality, I don't see it that way. I think the immorality creates the problem of wanting to use the pills.
I think the immorality creates the problem of wanting to use the pills. Sex creates the problem of wanting to use the pills. Ron Paul just equated sex with immorality. He just said that wanting to have sexual intercourse without having a baby is immoral.
The truth has to be told. There's a lot of truth to be told. That's the purpose of the American Free Press. That's what we do. All of our stories are checked. We literally have contributors all over the world. We get into the secret meetings, for example, of the Bilderbergers and other secret groups.
So many of these savages, according to our statistics, that are murdering our people on a daily basis. And there's nobody in the legal system that would dare say, bring back the rope, bring back the electric chair. Instead, they take our tax dollars and they feed these animals at the cost of our race. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you have been lied to about diversity and multiculturalism. The immigration crisis that's being pushed upon us by the race traders of Washington, D.C. They don't care about our people. They're too concerned about the homosexual rights.
Help Ron Paul with a Franklin for Franklin, January the 17th.
And a recent interview shows the new Republican Senate nominee in Kentucky, Rand Paul, opposes enforcing the Civil Rights Act on private businesses. In an interview with the Louisville Courier-Journal conducted last month, Rand Paul suggested anti-discrimination laws should only apply to public institutions.
Of telling private business owners, I abhor racism. I think it's a bad business decision to ever exclude anybody from your restaurant. But at the same time, I do believe in private ownership. But I think there should be absolutely no discrimination in anything that gets any public funding. And that's most of what the Civil Rights Act was about, to my mind.
But under your philosophy, it would be okay for Dr. King not to be served at the counter at Woolworths.
I would not go to that Woolworths.
Last night, Rand Paul appeared on MSNBC's Rachel Maddow show, where he was questioned about his views. Paul said he favored desegregating public areas like water fountains in schools in the 60s, but suggested he would have opposed efforts to desegregate privately owned lunch counters. Rand Paul won the Republican nomination in Tuesday's primary and has openly allied himself with the Tea Party movement. In December, his communications director, Christopher Hightower, resigned after his MySpace page was found to have a post declaring Happy N-Word Day, showing a photo of a lynching around the time of the federal Martin Luther King Jr. holiday.
Today, Senator Rand Paul ventured to Howard University, the prestigious historically black college in Washington, D.C., and his pitch to the Howard University students there was essentially that they surely would want to vote Republican if only they understood more about black history.
I mean, how many of you would have, if I would have said, who do you think the founders of the NAACP are? Do you think they were Republicans or Democrats? Would everybody in here know they were all Republicans?
Yes.
All right. You know more than I know. Okay, and that's, and I don't mean that to be insulting. I don't know what you know, and you don't, I mean, I'm trying to find out what the connection is.
Awkwardness aside, though, there is the more nuts and bolts issue of Senator Rand Paul's own record on the issue of race and discrimination and civil rights, which the students at Howard today knew about before he got there.
I thank you for coming, despite the fact that you have spoken out against the Civil Rights Act, against the Voting Rights Act, and you've done it as a champion of individual liberties and states' rights, and so I wonder, aside from the moral reasons not to discriminate, of which there are many, when is it okay legally to discriminate, according to you?
Well, I think it's a mischaracterization of my position, mischaracterization. I've never been against the Civil Rights Act, ever. And I still continue to be for the Civil Rights Act as well as enforcement of the 14th Amendment.
Elaborate on why,
Well, there was a long interview that had a long extended conversation about the ramifications beyond race, and I have been concerned about the ramifications of certain portions of the Civil Rights Act beyond race, as they are now being applied to smoking, menus, listing calories and things on menus, and guns. And so I do question some of the ramifications and the extensions, but I've never questioned the Civil Rights Act and never come out in opposition to the Civil Rights Act.
I've never questioned the Civil Rights Act. I could be wrong here, but I think the one interview that Rand Paul was referring to in that clip is the one that he did with me on this show back in May 2010. I remember it because it's the last time he ever spoke to me. During that interview, I tried for about 15 minutes to get Dr. Paul to state his position on the Civil Rights Act, whether he thinks it's kosher for the federal government to end discrimination in private businesses like bars and restaurants. It went on for 15 minutes because I wasn't ever able to get a straight answer out of him on that question, even after 15 minutes of repeated asking. But the reason I asked him in the first place was because of what Rand Paul had told his hometown newspaper on that subject just a few weeks earlier.
Would you have voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964?
I like the Civil Rights Act in the sense that it ended discrimination in all public domains, and I'm all in favor of that.
But?
You had to ask me the but. I don't like the idea of telling private business owners. I abhor racism. I think it's a bad business decision to ever exclude anybody from your restaurant. But at the same time, I do believe in private ownership.
That was Rand Paul in 2010 questioning the Civil Rights Act. And this was Rand Paul today.
Never questioned the Civil Rights Act.
Rand Paul saying at Howard University today that he never questioned the Civil Rights Act is not true. And it's not true on tape, as the moderator noted today at Howard. I mean, it's one thing to have a sketchy record on racial discrimination and basic civil rights law that you don't want to defend. It's another thing to be condescending enough to think you can get away with just flat-out lying about it.
If I asked you, dear viewer, for your thoughts on this man, John Wilkes Booth, my strong sense is that, well, you'd probably say something like I would say, which is he's a treasonous murderer who committed one of the gravest crimes in the entire history of America. He shot President Lincoln, who I think we can all probably agree was one of the good ones. Well, that view is not the opinion of the Southern Avenger. No, the Southern Avenger, who says he drinks a toast every year to celebrate Booth's birthday, believes that John Wilkes Booth, quote, heart was in the right place. The only problem, you see, is he seems to have with the cold-blooded murder of our 16th president, was that it turned Abraham Lincoln into a martyr, which the Southern Avenger regrets. This man's real name is Jack Hunter. He goes by the name Southern Avenger and was a radio show host in South Carolina from 1999 until last year. And these are not his only controversial statements. This is his whole worldview as far as we can tell. His entire profile is all archived on his website, southernavenger.com. Here is his signature Confederate flag lucha libre mask, pictured here with the Bush twins. Here's a 2004 post titled Black and White Pride, where he equates the KKK and the NAACP and writes that, quote, the groups in power today seek nothing less than the ultimate destruction of the traditional identity of Southern whites, who in turn have no voice and receive no respect. So it shouldn't come as a shock that flag-waving Southerners are really pissed off. Here's a 2004 piece titled, Are White People Out of Style?, where he writes that, quote, not only are whites not afforded the same right to celebrate their own cultural identity, but anything that is considered too white is immediately suspect. And, quote, the term diversity has become nothing more than a code word for not white, and it's a shame that just because we have fair skin, we are always denied fair treatment. Okay, so the country is filled with people like this. I mean, maybe not quite like this, but why am I telling you, you ask, about this particular character, Jack Hunter, the Southern Avenger? Well, because of the man he works for, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. Oh, yes, he does. See, Jack Hunter co-wrote Rand Paul's 2011 book, The Tea Party Goes to Washington. He's even thanked in the book's acknowledgments for his indispensable writing talent. He now serves as Rand Paul's new media director, right now. Now, the reason we know so much about Jack Hunter today, of all days, is because of an article on the conservative news website, The Free Beacon, linking to many of Hunter's statements. A spokesperson for Rand Paul told the site, Senator Paul holds his staff to a standard that includes treating every individual with equal protection and respect, without exception. Hunter, for his part, told The Free Beacon that his views on race have, quote, changed dramatically, sentiments he echoed in an April piece in the American Conservative. And there are some things that Rand Paul says once in a while that I agree with. Some stands he's taken I find downright praiseworthy. And there are a lot of things that Rand Paul says that I find absolutely loathsome. But in the final analysis, there are certain things, certain views, that just put you outside of the boundaries of being listened to on anything. I'd say white supremacy is one of those. An association with people that hold those views, or endorsements of feature of those views, well, they render you unfit. Even if you take the most charitable view possible, that say you get 3 white supremacist strikes, Rand Paul's in trouble. Strike 1 was in 2009 when Rand Paul's Senate campaign spokesperson was forced to resign over a horribly racist comment and historical image of a lynching, I'm not making that up, posted by a friend of his, on his MySpace wall on Martin Luther King weekend, been allowed to remain for almost 2 years. Rand Paul then went on the Rachel Maddow show, saying he didn't much like Civil Rights Act. That was strike 2. And now this, Southern Avenger on the senator's staff. Well, I'm sorry, Rand Paul. That's 3 racist strikes. You're out.